Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, joined by Dan Schneier once again, and a very special guest, Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. We're going to get into some stories. I would have Matt on just so we could talk about the RSP, but there's also a little bit of a history here with me and today's guest. Matt, thank you so much for joining.
Man, it's such a pleasure, and it's good seeing you again. You know, we're fellow alums of a certain site, footballguys.com, where I'm a senior staff writer there. So it's fun to reconnect. And Dan, it's always a pleasure to get to talk with you. I know we share a lot on Twitter, so it's great.
Yeah, I'm pumped to be here, Matt. I love your work, man. You're one of the first people that got me into the idea of I could watch these draft prospects. I could start to learn about them, and I could get so much more informed as they head into the NFL from the fantasy football landscape. So I love your work. I've gotten a chance to actually work with someone I associate with you on a podcast, Sig Bloom, who I love. And I don't know why I always associate him with you. You guys aren't connected in any way other than the podcast, but I just always, when I think of him, I think of you. And so I was really excited to get a chance to join you now finally on a pod.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, I will say I associate them because I and my wife told me we were sitting there eating Easter lunch, and she said she got, how we do now, a Facebook alert. 11 years ago today, Heath, you became a staff writer at Football Guys.
And that's how it all started.
Funny timing because we're having Matt on, and I still remember that first Vegas trip with Football Guys and going out there. And I will tell you the connection between Sigmund Bloom and Matt is that those were the guys who really kind of took me under their wing. I remember spending a lot of time that weekend, and really not just in terms of I was a baby in this industry when I went to Football Guys. I'd done nothing else fantasy football related. So they helped me a lot in that regard, but also just in regards to life. We had some phenomenal conversations.
For sure, and it's fun. It's a great group over there. There's a lot of terrific people. David Dobbs and Joe Bryant, who started the site, and Joe Bryant, who continues to own and run the site. Obviously has fostered a great group of folks, and it's a fun culture over there.
100%. Now, Matt, we like to start by letting you talk more than we do. And so from the very, very start here, I'd like for anyone who's been living under a rock, doesn't know about the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, doesn't know about what you do, what you've been doing for the last several months, just tell us all about it.
Sure. The Rookie Scouting Portfolio, and you can learn more about the work I do that puts into it at mattwaldmanrsp.com, or go to mattwaldman.com, either way, is a publication devoted to the evaluation of running back, wide receiver, and tight end prospects. I've been doing this for 18 years, and it is one of the two most purchased independent draft guides by NFL personnel and scouting, according to people like Alex Brown, who was the director of recruiting at SMU and has worked with Tom Herman over at Houston, and was also the head of recruiting at Rice. So he meets with scouts on a weekly basis. He sees what they look at, what they do. And this was all kind of born from me out in 2005 when I decided that I wanted to apply some really operations management and quality management principles to evaluating prospects based on things that I learned through certification as a director at a large corporation, that I had to implement this kind of work in another sphere. And so I have a very, detailed and transparent way of evaluating each of these positions. And I show it all in as entertaining of a fashion as possible in a PDF that you can download. Every April 1st is the pre-draft. You get a post-draft a week after the draft. And I try to say that it is NFL intensive or football approved, but definitely with an eye towards fantasy, as being, a staff writer at Football Guys since 2009 and being in this industry in fantasy since 2003. So, what it does is it gives you checklists and rankings, overrated, underrated. It gives you complete scouting reports that go probably in more comprehensive depth than you would see anywhere. I've had stories where I've literally had, I'm a Browns fan growing up, and my father was in Denver. So I saw more Elway games than I cared to see. So to be somewhere with CBS's Henry Hunt and Cecil Lammey at Football Guys, and John Elway walk in with two guys at a Starbucks in Mobile, and to walk in behind them, and these two guys who looked like they played, one of them was Lance Zeno, former offensive lineman for the Packers and Browns in the USFL, turn around and geek out. Oh, you're the guy from the YouTube videos. I've learned more about football and skill position prospects than I ever did in the NFL. And he's geeking out. And John Elway, and then he grabs the other guy and pulls him away. John Elway was talking, and I'm sitting there, and I had joked with Cecil that I wanted to sack John Elway because that would be the first time that anybody in Cleveland got a chance to do that. And literally they were geeking out over my stuff and saying, we're trying to get a job with John, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, you probably don't want to turn your back on him while he's talking to you. But, but it was a great moment to be able to tell my dad on a bucket list that two guys dissed John Elway in line trying to get a job because they were geeking out over me. So the RSP's you get the pre-draft, post-draft, you get a newsletter. It's available for $21.95. It's 1,163 pages worth of content, all bookmarked, so you don't have to feel like you're trying to read it all at once or can't find anything. It's a document really gives you 3 to 5 years of evergreen value for those guys in redraft leagues that suddenly start to emerge. You can see their scouting reports, and a portion of the proceeds, up to $5,000 each year, goes to an organization called Darkness to Light, D2L.org. They're an organization devoted to preventing sexual abuse of children through training programs. They've worked with Penn State, they've worked with Michigan State, they work with civic organizations, individuals, you name it, as well as how to help protect children further if they unfortunately have been victimized, so that the issues aren't compounded by people mishandling. So it's a great organization, and we've given over $55,000 to that organization since 2012 and plan on doing it once again.
That is so awesome. That was a fantastic breakdown. I'll tell you, I've used the RSP throughout my entire time that I've had the privilege of getting to write about football. It's like I've use it every year, but I don't think this. You almost, and maybe did, have a part in saving my football fandom, because
really
the first few years I was at CBS, I'm working with Dave and Jamie, and they both will tell you that they're really not fans of a team anymore. Like, they love football. They consume as much football as anyone, but they don't have a team anymore. And I was starting to get to that point. It was kind of a dark period of time for the Kansas City Chiefs. And I would still watch, but I was finding myself year after year, I was caring less and less. And then one year I'm reading the RSP, and before the draft ever happens, I fall in love with Patrick Mahomes, thanks to this guy, Matt Waldman. And then the Chiefs trade up to draft Patrick Mahomes, which brought me all kinds of great joy. But it might be a personality flaw, but we all enjoy things a little bit more when we were right about them before they happened, I think. And so the excitement that I had about Mahomes as a prospect, the certainty that I had that he was going to be good for the Chiefs one day, and then that coming to fruition and him turning out as the best quarterback in the NFL, well, I have no problem being a Kansas City Chiefs fan anymore. And I'm sure, Dan, that you had a similar experience with the things that Matt wrote about Daniel Jones.
Yeah, see, this is the whole thing. I knew we were going to get a Daniel Jones thing going here. I saw it in the rundown. I am the most misinterpreted Giants guy ever, because he, for some reason, thinks that I think Daniel Jones is some elite level quarterback, just because I didn't want to let him go at 25 years old for nothing. But back to the actual RSP, I actually did have a moment of coming to with the RSP as well, and it actually helped me. I don't want to say win my first season in a dynasty league, but get an asset that I felt was helping set me up for future years. So it was the 2018 class, and this was the first time I really came onto a player that Matt loved, Nick Chubb. And what Matt broke down with Nick Chubb, who was actually his RB1 in that class, if I'm not mistaken, over Saquon Barkley. And I agree with that, by the way. And here's the Giants' background, but I think Nick Chubb is a better running back than Saquon Barkley for reasons that Matt explained that I never really thought about when evaluating prospects at the running back position. From 2011 or till 2017, whenever I started this to 2017, I always kind of looked at speed score and all of those types of things with running backs. And then Matt brought into the process actual mental processing with the running backs and how they set up their blocks, how they see their blocks, all sorts of things. I mean, read the RSP. You're going to get that stuff in there. I don't want to spoil it all.
I feel like I could retire right now.
Yeah, too much. We're hyping you too much.
I should quit right now, man.
But I just want to say, he had Nick Chubb RB1 in that class. Nick Chubb was the RB1 in that class. No offense, Giants fans. I still think he's a better runner than Saquon Barkley. And that was a good moment for me because I started to look for different things at the running back position.
So we got a little short segment here we call 3 questions for Matt, and we'll get through these really quick here. What is the thing, because we're going to talk about quarterbacks today, maybe tight ends as well, we'll see, that you believe is undervalued in quarterback evaluation in the NFL?
I think it's gaining ground right now, but it's processing information and mainly about reading leverage and being able to identify the receiver as he's making his break against position against a defender, and knowing that that's the ball needs to come out and having the confidence to get that ball out, because that's the difference between, say, Alex Smith being a longtime veteran who's still 2 to 3 beats late in a pivotal moment, and Patrick Mahomes who just lets it go. And that's often the difference between a lot of guys who have the robo quarterback body that everybody wants to draft early, and the guy who people get maybe a little scared of, but actually is the guy that's going to make the big plays.
Excellent answer. I will ask a tight end question in these 3 questions as well, but it's kind of telling on myself. Am I just being lazy saying I don't want to think about rookie tight ends anymore because I'll just trade for them after 18 months when they're cheaper?
Nah, man, if you're good at trading, why not? In maybe a 1.5 PPR league where everybody hoards tight ends, maybe you're going to have to do a little bit more digging early on. But even then, I mean, I think I've built some dynasty teams trading away for Gronkowski when people are like, oh, well, he's getting old. And I'm like, well, he's got another 5 to 6 years left. I think I can deal with that. I'll give away a top receiver for that, So yeah, I'm with you.
And then last one, how many quarterbacks in this draft will have a better fantasy career than Daniel Jones?
Well, I would say Vegas would probably say 2.5, so I'll go 3. That will probably have a better career, because if it was before last year, I might have said 5, but Jones has played better. He did a good job, and Dable's done a great job with him.
I worry that some of that is coaching. We'll find out this year. I worry a lot of that is coaching.
I believe it is. Him and Kafka.
You talk about the robo stuff with the quarterback. That's the biggest gripe I have with Daniel Jones. It's seeing the field post snap, and it's getting the ball, especially on the outs and the sidelines, those hole shots he never throws. But we'll see.
Yeah.
An even shorter segment because of the lack of news in the NFL, or at least news that we care about from a dynasty fantasy football perspective. The only real news that I saw this week, Odell Beckham signed a 1-year deal with Baltimore. He's going to make apparently $15 million to play 1 year of football, which is pretty fantastic work. Could make up to $18 million. I think the good news here, Dan, and I'll go to you first, is that it seems like Lamar Jackson was involved in this process, which... my only real concern, I'm a big Lamar Jackson guy. My only real concern was that he's not going to get the contract worked out.
Yeah, I think now we know that there's a good chance that his contract's going to get worked out. I actually think the Ravens are going to double down as well. I think they're going to draft a wide receiver with their first-round pick and really commit to Lamar that we're changing things up here. We're getting you weapons, and I think it's going to be good news for Lamar. One thing that I worry about with that whole situation is I feel like the one thing no one's talking about is that offensive line has gotten considerably worse since his MVP season, and I haven't seen them make maybe the investments I was hoping they would in the draft there. So I'm curious to see if that's the direction they might go instead.
I like Dan's thought there, and I think that that's probably where they will go as offensive line, because I think the combination of Beckham and Bateman is a good combo. You can interchange them to a degree. Bateman looked great to begin the season before he got hurt. That offensive line has been a huge issue for Jackson, who is a fantastic pocket quarterback, but really has had to maximize every bit of his skill to keep this team in it. And their running game, I mean, while statistically it may look like it's still comparable, J.K. Dobbins coming back and now fully healthy is going to be a big deal. So I have no worries about Jackson, and didn't have any worries about Jackson going with Baltimore. I think this is all going to get played out by June, and we'll see Jackson in uniform.
So go make those buy low offers right now on Lamar Jackson is what that would say. We will get to Matt's quarterback evaluations very shortly. First, I want to tell people we have lots of Dynasty content coming up. You can find it all on the Dynasty landing page. That's on the fantasy football page at cbssports.com. This week, I will be releasing my top 25 rookie-only rankings. No coincidence. That's coming after April 1st because I don't put those out without reading what Matt said about these prospects. Also, we've got the mailbag and Dynasty newsletter coming on Friday. Dynasty download. Every Friday, our FFT newsletter has a Dynasty slant, so check that out as well. Let's jump right into the quarterbacks, Matt. Give us your elevator pitch just on how you evaluate quarterbacks. This class, yes, but as a whole.
Yeah, so I had to write this down, to be honest with you, because it was like the kind of the way I do it. It wouldn't do it justice if I tried to do it off the cuff. So I'll put it this way. So I grade by breadth and depth, and that's breadth of talent and depth of talent. Breadth of talent to me is how much a player is shown on tape, what they can do. It's like resume bullet points. Depth of talent is really how well they can do it. And so this matters to me because, say, Michael Vick couldn't do the breadth of talent things that Aaron Rodgers can do. But what he did well made him a Pro Bowl caliber producer. So I have a grading checklist of 98 behaviors for the position that are defined in writing and weighted on a 100-point scale to assess what I show they can do, which is breadth of talent. And then I chart multiple games of each quarterback with a large matrix of factors. And the matrix goes like this. There's 6 scenarios in all their possible combinations: scripted, unscripted plays, throws under pressure, throws without pressure, throws versus man coverage, throws versus zone coverage. And for each of these combinations of scenarios, I grade the quarterback's degree of accuracy, touch, and velocity for each throw for 12 specific zones of the football field. And when I say accuracy, it's either what I call general accuracy or area code catchable accuracy, meaning that the receiver should catch it, but they might have to make some form of an adjustment that's not unbelievably difficult to do. And then there's pinpoint accuracy, which was what Bill Walsh told Mike Holmgren. No, don't tell Joe Montana that was a good catch. It has to be placed exactly here for this specific route with this type of coverage on it. That's what pinpoint is. And don't ever tell him that's a good throw unless it's something that's pinpoint. So I grade those types of things. For each of these, I use this to inform the accuracy component of what I call my depth of talent assessment. So this is how well a player does what he does. I do this by stack ranking all the quarterbacks into 19 position-specific categories, and each category has 6 tiers ranging from deficient for the NFL to star caliber. And I give bonuses either based on that I can see there's potential for improvement there, or that there's a reasonable expectation for improvement based on studying the NFL every week and looking at how players perform, or that they have some high level of upside skills. And if they can unlock one part of the component that is preventing them from getting to the next tier, they're going to skip maybe 2 tiers in terms of their grade ranking. And so these tiers have several defined criteria points. They're designed to categorize how well a player has performed, and it has a value and a depth of talent score on a 100-point scale, like the breadth of talent. And that's how I make my ranking. So this is probably one of the reasons, just to sum up, why a quarterback coach like Will Hewlett, who worked with Brock Purdy last year, Anthony Richardson this year, and pre-draft, and then worked with Trevor Lawrence last offseason, asked for my reports to look at before he starts working with guys.
And it's also part of the reason why my rookie-only rankings did not come out until after April 1st. Dan, it looked like you had something that you wanted to come in there with.
I did want to come in there with something because actually this week I'm working on draft profiles and I'm doing Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman of Tennessee. And that led me to this question, Matt. How do you view schemed production in your evaluation of quarterbacks? Because watching a player like Hendon Hooker, who I actually think is a player I would bet on over a Will Levis any day personally, despite the scheme production,
Me too.
It is impossible not to see that, that offense is not anything like what you're going to get at the NFL level. To me, he's the best coach right now in any football because he's completely taking advantage of the rules, but those rules don't apply to the NFL. And you're seeing a lot of, I guess I would say, space for Hendon Hooker to throw the ball into that he might not get at the NFL level. So how would you factor in kind of the scheme production and the differences in the college game in the rules versus translate and projecting that to the NFL at the quarterback position?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what I'm trying to look at are things that project the most to the NFL. And there's always going to be something that could be missing to a degree from what you see on the player's tape. Because when I look at breadth of talent or what you can see, sometimes not all that's going to be there based on the scheme that the player's in. So It doesn't mean the player can't do it. It just means that you didn't see him do it. So I can't give the guy credit. That's kind of what but then I'll go back and look at Virginia Tech tape because he was there. And I can see if I can find it in that. But in his case, if I couldn't see either, then I say he's got to prove that he can do these things. And because I look at so many points of value, really, if they're missing something, it's not going to be the difference between them being an NFL caliber player and being a guy that wouldn't even make a semi-pro league, you know? So to me with Hooker right now, the things that I didn't see with his game really had to do with even things that he did well, at least results wise, which is processing the ball, processing things fast enough. Like he's got a great vertical arm, but he can be a beat or two late in the vertical game. So even though he's had success, if you're looking at the right things process wise, sometimes the scheme may have limitations for what you can see, but it's not going to be a killer overall for their grade.
Okay.
And I think we have to, at this point, get to the main event. We're going to start with the main event, and then we'll work through the rest of these quarterbacks. But the main event at quarterback this year, it's C.J. Stroud versus Bryce Young versus Anthony Richardson. Who's number one in the NFL draft? Who's number one in fantasy rankings? And now, Matt, the way I look at this, it seems like Richardson is clearly the most exciting. And I can get pretty excited about Bryce Young as well, especially because who doesn't want to cheer for the little guy? C.J. Stroud almost bores me. But also, if I had to bet on who, like I'm betting my life on who's going to start and win the most games in the NFL, I'd probably choose C.J. Stroud. How far off am I? And then is there one of these guys you'd pound the table for?
You're not far off. And I would be, as a dynasty manager, I would say, I wouldn't argue with any of those three. But if I'm recommending someone, it's going to be Anthony Richardson. And to me, it's Richardson, and I mean, I'll give you my three. I don't really care. It's Anthony. It's Anthony in this case. Anthony Richardson, C.J. Stroud, just below that, and then maybe a little bit more below that is Bryce Young. But to me, it's because when you look at what Richardson knows how to do, and it gets overlooked a lot with his game, is his processing speed is very fast. His ability to manipulate defenders, which is a very important part of the game. And it's not, he looked off the deep safety. That's like everyone does that.
Yeah.
You do that in high school. It's like looking off the corner in the shallow flat and the flat linebacker with a way, after looking off your first two reads and then looking off that guy and being able to manipulate them so that you can layer a throw Justin Herbert style over the intermediate zone into a tight window, like 30, 35 yards downfield, and do it pinpoint. He makes those types of throws, and he does it often where he's in a tight pocket and climbing away from people. So he may not have as much of experience. He may make some dumb reads of cover two and, that types of things. But the things he does know how to do are advanced quarterbacking skills that are only going to get better. And it's an integration of skills that are very difficult to teach. So the fact that he's integrating things at an advanced level of the things that he already knows, that is a huge plus for him. And when you look at Stroud, I think Stroud is a very polished guy who will be able to add more to his game, because when you get to the NFL and you're trying to learn about different coverages and they're being disguised more expertly, the speed of the game is unbelievable. And you've got guys who are all 320, 315 to 325 along the line who can basically chase you down in ways that you didn't get to have as often in the SEC or ACC or Big Ten. You could, if you don't have a fundamentally sound game like Stroud with footwork and drops and how you position yourself and moving around the pocket, those things can, if you're not super strong in those fundamentals start to crack too as you're getting exposed to all these new things. So I would expect Stroud to be the most stable early on of the three. But I think that Richardson and Young will both acclimate fast enough that within 3 to 4 years, they're guys that you can either say are as good as Stroud or a little better.
Can I ask you real quick on Young? Because you said you had him a little bit below the other two. And can you tell me what it's related to other than the size and the frame?
Yeah, it's red zone processing for me. He's a guy that sometimes holds on to it too long or makes throws that you really shouldn't make there. Though he has great skill with really targeting certain leverage types and placing the ball in ways that there are a couple of times I looked at it and said, nah, he really didn't mean to do that. And then I look at some more of the tape and say, well, yeah, I guess maybe he did. I got to give him credit for that. That was really awesome, but there, Mahomes, I always remember seeing right away and going, he meant to do that. And that was insane. That was genius what he did, but it's crazy. With Young, it was almost like that, but there were some situations where I thought, I don't know. I don't know if I can go there, but maybe it's because I never saw it before until I saw Mahomes. And maybe I'm a little more cautious with that when I saw Young do it, but I got to give him credit.
That's fair.
Now, would your ranking of these three be any different for NFL GMs than it is for Dynasty fantasy managers?
Not at all. Not at all. And I think that NFL, it would be, I joke because, Michael Lombardi, I think, is a guy who said, the idea of Anthony Richardson being a top 5 quarterback is absurdity squared. But I would say that if part of your argument is invoking Malik Willis's name, part of your argument is
terrible.
Part of your argument too is that you're watching film, but you're using Bill Parcells or a variant of Bill Parcells rules for quarterbacking, which is really great guidelines, but it's a keep it simple, stupid method of not screwing up. And Mahomes, Brady, Rodgers, Breeze, Roethlisberger, Cam Newton, Lamar Jackson, all broke those rules. Okay. So maybe they need to be updated from 1980, 1990s. It has been a number of years. If you add that to it, and then you just add to the fact that, that when you look at those things, and there's one other aspect that I can't remember, but I would say not valuing Anthony Richardson like that as a top 5 option is absurdity cubed. And I think that a lot of NFL executives they don't trust their scouts. That's the other absurdity. So, is that their scouts, they look at this. I think a lot of them understand what good quarterbacking looks like. But sometimes, like the Alex Smith thing. I mean, there were guys who watched 3 years of his tape or 2 years of his tape. And the guy in it's well publicized in Los Angeles wanted them to change their grade last minute because Gil Brandt was gushing over his pro day of scripted throws, and said, here's a tape, 20 highlights. I want you to regrade this based on 20 highlights. And the GM nearly got in a fight with his scouts because the scouts were like, we're not signing off on this BS. So I would say start to embrace processing. Rick Spielman's very good. Had a good track record as a GM. If you're that long in the league and you've fielded competitive teams, maybe they've never won a Super Bowl with him, but he was certainly a rock solid GM. If he tells you that they're just discovering that processing is a very important thing, and they're trying to figure out how to really grade it because they're realizing that mental whiteboard knowledge and recall, book smarts, SAT smarts is different than on-field smarts and quick understanding of mechanical, intuitive, all of that. That should tell you something. And I think a lot of guys, there's still half the league, I think, is kind of behind that.
Speaking of Rick Spielman, check out the With the First Pick podcast. Dan, I wanted to ask you, there's obviously a big difference stylistically, but do you see a big difference in terms of actual fantasy value? Or are you thinking in rookie drafts, these three guys are going to go back to back to back?
I think there is probably a difference from a fantasy standpoint. With a player like Anthony Richardson, you have the rushing upside, which I'm not so sure you have with those other two quarterbacks. Bryce Young will run, but I'm not so sure that's going to translate at the next level the same way it did at Alabama. CJ Stroud is not looking to run. Maybe that'll be a component of his game that he improves the NFL or changes at the NFL level. He saw it a little bit more in that game against Georgia, which was by far and away the best game of film you'll see from Stroud. And I have my own issues with Stroud. I think just like with Levis for me with Stroud, when I watch them, they're really bad against pressure. And that was the one thing that really killed Zach Wilson, I think, at the NFL level. So we'll see there, but he did improve against Georgia. But from a fantasy standpoint, Richardson has such a different level of rushing upside for that fantasy profile. So to me, he would be the first pick if I'm taking him in redraft leagues.
Oh yeah, I think he will be. I think the thing that I struggle with, Matt, and I know I'm not going to use the name Malik Willis, but I do think that like Richardson's floor is a little bit scary to me in a league where I have to start 2 quarterbacks. In a league where I only have to start 1 quarterback, the only thing that I care about with my quarterback is how much upside he has. And so I think there's a pretty good gap between Richardson and the other guys maybe. His upside is significantly different than those guys. But his floor's lower as well, right? Like, would you shrink that gap at all in a league where you have to start 2 quarterbacks?
I think his floor is lower if he winds up on a team where the coaching staff doesn't allow him to be a full-fledged quarterback. And there's a chance that happens because of just the biases that can exist. You look at Lamar Jackson, and it's like he played in Bobby Petrino's NFL-style offense before he came there. And there's like this blindness of like, these GMs are like, he's not a quarterback. He's a running back because, he didn't play in an offense that Tom Coughlin said Bobby Petrino was one of the best NFL play callers,
right?
That we had. I mean, that's kind of how I felt when I kept hearing all that mess. And when you look at Richardson, I mean, he's an elite learner, according to Will Hewlett. Just said he is an elite learner transferring. He's never encounter anybody like that. And look, he coaches Drew Bledsoe's son too. So like if Drew Bledsoe, was a Pro Bowl quarterback, right. he trusts the kid. He trusts his kid with Hewlett. You'd have to say, come on now. But like, I understand that like there is a component where early on in his career, if you're trying to start him in a 2 quarterback league this year, you're going to have some boom bust moments for sure. He's not going to be the guy you want maybe from that perspective because he will not recognize certain coverages. He's going to make some hero throws. It's going to be like having Matt Stafford times 1.5 early on in Stafford's career. But you're also going to see those moments where you're like, let me just ride it out for a couple years because it's going to get there.
Unfortunately, we're getting really close to the tight end portion of the show. But Dan, I'm going to start with you, but I want both of you to answer independent of draft capital, because I know for all these guys, like going first is the best landing spot. But like, is there a team or a fit for one or all of these quarterbacks, just like a realistic landing spot that you think would be better for these guys?
So personally for me, I love the landing spot of Anthony Richardson to the Falcons. Not a lot of people are talking about it, but to me, that's the best landing spot. I really appreciate what Arthur Smith does from a coaching standpoint. I think him and Dable were up there for the most schemed offense you could find in the NFL last year. And I think Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder struggled within that offense. Ridder, I wanted to like more, but I watched him, and it's his first year, so I don't love to judge these quarterbacks after 1 year. But there were some definite accuracy issues there and some ball placement issues. But you put him in that system with Arthur Smith, with a healthy Kyle Pitts and Drake London, who I really like, I think there's a chance that he could immediately be a productive quarterback at the NFL level. So of all the quarterbacks I think about, that's my favorite fit.
I think we can already see the impact of Odell Beckham signing with the Ravens, because before today, it was always, can we get Lamar Jackson to go to Atlanta to play Drake London and Kyle Pitts? Now we'd like to send Anthony Richardson there. How about you, Matt? What do you think about landing spot here?
I think the Atlanta idea is a very good one. I'll just add Seattle to that mix, mainly because I know a lot of people are down on like, well, look what happened with Russell Wilson with Seattle and the relationship there. But I think that you can get more from the pocket with Anthony Richardson than Wilson, who's decent in the pocket when he's on his game, but isn't a guy that's going to hang in there as much as what Richardson can do. And I think with that, the foundation of that run game, with the receivers that they have, you could probably get, and also, if Geno sticks around, you have Geno sticking around, you could kind of get a little bit of a Alex Smith to Patrick Mahomes transition year going on there. So I wouldn't mind that. I wouldn't mind Detroit, to be honest with you. The same thing with Goff. Yeah. With that offensive line too, it would be fantastic. So they've got a really, to me, that's the place where I really wanted to see Richardson is in Detroit.
I like that even better than Atlanta, because I think Johnson's an even better offensive schemer maybe than Arthur Smith.
Really odd that neither one of you said Houston. Will Levis is the guy that everybody else talks about once you get past that three-way battle. This is not, Matt, your number 4 quarterback. This is not particularly close to your number 4 quarterback. What are your biggest concerns with Will Levis?
Well, he's a slow processor, so that means that like when he sees the leverage where the defender has a the receiver has an advantageous position over the defender, it takes him 2 to 3 beats longer to get the ball out. That works in college, doesn't work as well in the NFL. He's not and then on top of that processing being slow, his accuracy is not strong for the NFL game. And part of that is rooted in footwork issues where, you want the midline of your back foot aligned with where the target is going to be thrown, where it needs to be thrown. And then you want your front toe there too. And his midline sometimes is there, not always. And the toe was pointed out in space somewhere. And then when he begins his throw, he tries to click them together. And that usually leads to those Baker Mayfield-esque throws behind Odell Beckham that happen on a regular basis to get Pops all upset, So you have those kinds of issues with Levis. And the fact that he had a quarterback coach from the NFL, for the past year, maybe 2 years, I think now, or maybe it's the past year. Yeah, and
I think only 2021. Yeah,
Scangarello.
Oh, Scangarello
was the guy. He's had him, and it still isn't fixed. And that's a big thing with his accuracy. And he's spending a lot of time. I mean, this thing's more narrative, and it's aside. It's not that big of a weight, but it's the fact that he's decided to rock himself up a la Brady Quinn before the draft. But he's not. But his footwork is still this way, and that's hard to fix. That's a hard to fix issue. So is processing. So when you put those two things together, he's got the NFL arm. He's a robo quarterback. So teams are going to love him. He's the guy that they're going to like. Sometimes someone may like him more than Anthony Richardson, in the same way that teams like Baker Mayfield more than Patrick Mahomes, or Mitchell Trubisky more than Patrick Mahomes. And these are the same guys that I remember grading going, they shouldn't be drafted in the first round. These aren't guys. Zach Wilson, same thing. Shouldn't draft these guys early. They don't process the field as quickly as you think. They've got some issues here. Maybe they can be contributors, maybe even journeyman starters over time, but they are not the guys you want to bet that kind of investment on.
Now, Dan, how does all that go with the fact if somebody makes the move and jumps into the top 10 to draft him? Where does he just automatically become QB4 anyway?
Not for me. I mean, I'm a lot like Matt in this sense. I'm just really going to stick with my own evaluations. I personally don't see it at all with Will Levis. I watched a lot of Levis tape in 2021, which is supposed to be his quote unquote good season because of Wan'Dale Robinson, because the Giants drafted him. So saw 6 full games. For me with Levis, it's all the things Matt said, and then on top of that, I don't see the arm talent that everyone's raving about. A lot of the deep balls to Wan'Dale or whoever he's thrown to in that season kind of floated in there. The receiver a lot of times had to high point it, had to slow down to catch it. There's some zip on the outs, but and those are NFL throws. And then the athleticism too. It's this guy's supposed to be a runner as well, but he's not going to be an NFL runner. I don't think at the NFL level he's going to be a big fantasy contributor there. So I don't know. I just don't see it at all. This is not a quarterback I would invest in Dynasty.
Matt, I know you'd rather be positive, so I'm going to give you a chance. You are officially, I believe, the Jake Haener guy. Tell us all about him.
I'll give Felix Sharp from Campus to Canton, who I do a podcast each week, as the guy who kind of was talking about him first, but I certainly as a guy who could amplify that. Haener to me is what you would say Brock Purdy got to be last year, and could probably be in more offenses than San Francisco, whereas Purdy might have lucked out by winding up in San Francisco. Right. But Haener to me is probably a journeyman starter backup kind of in that line. He has a good enough but not great arm, so he's not like a first round caliber arm talent. But he understands, I think, when you look at his game as a processor, he's someone that's, how would I put it? He reads coverage well. He makes sound decisions. He understands how to play within his limits. He's tough. He moves around the pocket well. I think he's a good example of players that I value more than the robo quarterbacks. So when I say that processing is the underrated thing, then guys like Haener, Stetson Bennett, a couple other folks will wind up higher on my board than a guy with a big arm, a big body, and not much processing speed and accuracy.
I like that.
So one of my questions, and you may have just answered it. I was going to ask you, who is the guy who could have the second half finish of their rookie year like Brock Purdy did, like Gardner Minshew did 3 or 4 years ago, like Davis Mills did a couple of years ago? Would Haener be that guy for you?
Haener, really, there's 3 guys: Haener, Bennett, and maybe if Tyson Bagent finds his way onto a team, inside of the 6th round, that might be the case, because all 3 of them have that processing speed. They have intermediate accuracy. They move around the pocket well, and their arms are just good enough to be on an NFL field throwing the football. Even if they're not great, Bagent is probably good enough to be above that tier. But those 3 guys would be my candidates.
Do you have a late round guy, Dan, that you're going to be taking in the 3rd round of Superflex drafts and just hoping that everything works out perfect in his rookie year?
I do. It's not a player Matt named. I'm curious to get Matt's thoughts on if we have a little bit of time. It's Clayton Tune out of Houston.
Tune's fun. I mean, he's big. He can move. He makes some outstanding throws. So I get it. I mean, I totally get where you're coming from there. He makes some throws moving to his left that you're just like, that's a big time throw. He makes a lot of those. It's just cleaning up some of the things that he can do. The big thing with quarterbacking is this too, is just real quick, is that it's not always the huge plays that you make. It's the series of little plays that you should make. And the best quarterbacks do that. Tom Brady's a great example of that.
Yep. Excellent. So we're going to move on to my favorite position, the tight end position, the one where you can get instant fantasy impact, especially if they're drafted in the 1st round, because the 1st round tight end is a sure thing. Matt, who are the legitimate potential difference makers in this class in your mind?
Ozzie Newsome, Tony Gonzalez, and so legitimate difference makers in this class. I think Dalton Hilliard is atop the board, and mainly because of what he does as a receiver and what he can do after the catch. He can win one-on-one with you. Michael Mayer, certainly because he's a blocker, is going to be in that scheme because you can match him up one-on-one in the short area of the field in the red zone, and he's a good zone player. But I would say that he's a difference maker maybe earlier than he is long-term. You're looking at, I would rather have Kincaid earlier as opposed to, or have Kincaid, long-term, and Mayer's kind of more that early guy that will give you solid production, but it's not going to have that high ceiling. There's a lot of guys that could be potential difference makers, and I would say included in that are, people aren't talking about him, Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan, who I think is a better receiver than people realize because he got hidden at Michigan being in line all the time. But I think he can win. From what I've seen in small doses, I think he can win off the line of scrimmage as a detached option, and he's the best blocker in this class. And then, in addition to that, when you look at these tight ends, another guy, Darnell Washington, is certainly also deserves to be on that list. I'm sure we'll talk about him a little bit more. But those are probably the ones that Sam Laporta, if he gets a situation where they say, look, we're going to use you like Evan Ingram. He's Evan Ingram with better hands when Ingram wasn't showing those hands as often as he should have in New York. So if you get Jacksonville Ingram,
he'll lose slowly as a blocker, which is what you want. So they'll be able to keep him on the field.
Yeah. So there you go. So he is definitely a guy that I'm a big fan of. So there's a lot of tight ends here that have that potential if they're used in a way where we're going to minimize the amount of blocking you do early on. But long-term, all of them could be either strong matchup threats or guys who can do enough that they're going to get opportunities off of their blocking based on play action.
He'll lose slowly. That's definitely going to be one of my fantasy football team names in 2023, Dan. Thank you for that.
That's what you want out of tight ends in the blocking game. Lose slowly.
Is there anybody you're real excited about in this class, Dan?
I am really excited about a few players. Dalton Kincaid is definitely the player I'm most excited about. Reminds me a lot of Zach Ertz if he had more juice. My favorite fit for him is actually to your team, Heath, the Chiefs at 31. I would love to see Andy Reid get him in that offense. Would love to see that. One player who Matt didn't mention, I want to talk about Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan. One thing Matt didn't mention about him, to me, he reminds me a lot of a more athletic version of Daniel Bellinger, who played a lot with the Giants last year, and before the injury had some fantasy success. If you look at his RAS score, it's like 9.89. This dude is a much better athlete than people realize. And like Matt said, hidden a little bit playing at Michigan. As far as a few other guys I like that Matt didn't mention, this is probably the most polarizing prospect at tight end, but I just feel like in fantasy, the upside is so high, and it's Luke Musgrave. If you I mean, there's just not many humans in this world who are almost 6'6", 260, and can move vertically the way he did. And some of his Senior Bowl reps that I watched against these like safeties and linebackers, he's just leaving them in the dust. And
he can block.
And he can block too. So he has the frame for it too. So that'll help him get on the field. So Luke Musgrave is somebody I would want to say. And then finally, one final player, just to throw maybe like a long-term, maybe sleeper type pick out you. Now I'm blanking. I don't know why. For some reason I'm blanking.
Old Dominion?
No, that's the all upside one. That's the bet on traits one. But out of Purdue, Dalton, because I was watching a lot of Charlie Jones, the receiver. I think it's Durham Payne Durham, and he is a really interesting prospect because I was watching Charlie Jones, who I think is a great sleeper in this class at wide receiver, and then watching Payne, I was like, wow, this dude can get open over the middle of the field, and he's a big body. I think he can immediately kind of be like a red zone guy at the NFL level. So
he's the best pass catcher of the tight ends in this class.
There you go.
If you ask me, best hands. He might have the best hands of anybody in this class. If you ask me, he's just slow, but he's got good short area quickness. And like you said, I mean, like some team's going to look at him and go, it's 3rd and 7 and I need 8 yards and it's a crowded window. I don't care because he's going to catch it.
Yep.
The best hands, and that's awesome. And I also didn't realize there's anyone more athletic than Daniel Bellinger, so that's exciting as well.
He had a great athletic profile.
Do you guys think there are any rookie first-round picks in this class? Any guys we should be drafting in the top 12? I'd probably say probably not in Superflex, but even in a one-quarterback league.
I mean, 1.5 PPR for sure. Yeah. But if we're gonna let's not make it that easy because I'm not gonna take the easy way out on that. So I would say I would consider Dalton Kincaid probably the end of the first round. I think that's a bet I'd be willing to make because I have him graded within the same range of guys like like Pitts and Freiermuth in terms of the tier. He may be at the bottom end of that tier, but he still has that Kelsey like upside. In terms of if Kelsey wasn't paired with the greatest quarterback that we've ever seen. So, with Kirk Cousins, even I would say that he's capable of becoming what Hawkinson did. And Hawkinson I loved, but Hawkinson was a top 3 tight end this year. So.
Yeah, and look, we moved Sky Moore into the back end of round 1 last year after the landing spot with the Chiefs. So it depends on landing spot too, but I think if you get him in with Andy Reid, he's going to be an immediate impact player. Dalton Kincaid, that is. And I'm actually a little bit higher than Matt is on Michael Mayer. I just think a lot of why we didn't see massive production there is because he played in that Notre Dame offense, which is not really a good offense for passing game standards, especially not for the tight ends. Like, how many times when you're watching Michael Mayer, do you see them throw him a little screen around the line of scrimmage, like a bubble, and you're like, why are you using this guy like this? Like, use him in the intermediate game. Use him vertically. Like, what are you doing here? So,
as a matriculated to the University of Miami, maybe I just have some Notre Dame bias. It's still latent in there with me. I don't know. It might be that.
I think Notre Dame bias is perfectly healthy. Okay, you mentioned him earlier, but Darnell Washington, is he the most interesting man at the position? I am having a really hard time figuring out, Matt, what I think of this guy.
He may very well be, and I think it's because obviously look at that 4.08 shuttle. That is ridiculous.
Crazy.
Okay. And a 4.64 ain't shabby either, obviously, for a 6'7", 264-pound man.
11-inch hands?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I've got some oven mitts that my pit bull was like playing with, that probably aren't as big as his hands, so, but the thing is with Washington, he's going to win, the ball above the rim. He does that very well. He's someone that if you give him straight line routes, kind of like DK Metcalf, over routes running across the zone, you give him seam routes, you give him any type of, a post or anything like that, he'll do pretty good. If you're asking him to run stop routes, ask him to run digs, that change of direction quickness isn't as strong. And the same thing with his blocking, where keep him in a short area where he just has to pivot and move, and he's good and he could get better. If you ask him to be a lead blocker and you want him to make a series of small adjustments to take on the linebacker or safety, taking an angle in that box, and he has to stop, start, or redirect on the fly while on the move, that's more problematic for him. So I think they'll find ways for him to win. But I look at him and I think, why can't he be a lot like, Jimmy Graham in terms of how teams use him? And I think that I don't have an answer to that question that's a negative one. So I think that I joke that he's a broadsword more than a scalpel when it comes to how you use him. And he has a high ceiling of production. The biggest concern I have with him, and it's not going to detract my desire to invest him at the right time, is because he's a big body guy. A lot of these big body guys, and Jimmy Graham had a long career and stayed healthy, but some of these guys we've looked at who've been big bodied like that, they have a lot of surface area to take punishment, and that punishment can wear you down and change you as a player. So I just, I do wonder about that long term. It might be a guy that I'm excited about for the first 3 to 5 years, and then I'm selling him high maybe after that. We'll see.
Can I give you my one concern on him real quick and see where you stand on it, Matt? My one concern with Darnell Washington, and I love him for NFL teams, less so for fantasy, is does he end up getting like the George Kittle, and it wasn't last year with Kittle once they turned to Purdy, but treatment where he's so good as a blocker that he's used often as a blocker. Like at times you watch San Fran film and you're like, they're just using him as like a third tackle on the field here for all these snaps. He's not detaching from the line of scrimmage often. And we know in fantasy, like you want to find those tight ends who are detaching from the line of scrimmage and use more as receivers. And maybe he's just so good as a blocker that they just leave him in line a lot and use him in that way.
Well, maybe I'm underestimating Washington's blocking ability a bit. So if I am, then
I'm
overestimating
it.
yeah. But I mean, for me, I think Kittle was a monster as a blocker. And I think that what he can do, it allowed him. Very rarely do you see blockers who can run front side plays and be the front side blocker. I think Washington can do that on some plays, but not all.
Okay.
And I think that the way that he's used, and also the way most offenses run, most offenses don't say we need a tight end like Kittle. We're going to run this huge library of plays that Shanahan tends to run in the running game. So he's Kittle's kind of that linchpin in that offense that way. I think Washington will probably get leveraged more for his receiving, so I'm not as concerned about that.
So I've got some trivia for you now, because I noticed on the graphic it said he had the second largest tight end hands in combine history. Do you guys know who had the largest hands for a tight end in NFL combine history?
I'm going to guess Eric Green, but I have no idea.
No, he is an active player.
Okay.
And I don't even think it was particularly close. Like they were significantly bigger than Darnell Washington. And it might be a role that you might be concerned that Washington finds himself in. It's Mo Alley Cox.
Look at that. No idea.
Solely going to be my Darnell Washington comp because they have the two biggest pairs of hands in combine history.
Well, they should, at the end of their careers, they could go to work for Williams Sonoma and they could use their hands as cast for those oven mitts, So there you go.
Matt, that's all we've got for you today. I kept it under an hour, which is a major accomplishment for me because I wanted to talk to you all day long. Listen, I wouldn't keep it under an hour if I thanked you for all the things I wanted to thank you for. So just thank you for coming on today, for joining us. Tell the people one last time where they can find all of your content.
If you just want to skip everything and just buy the RSP, you can go to mattwaldmanrsp.com. If you want to look at the content, go to mattwaldman.com. You want to go to mattwaldman.com just to buy it. You can also find your way to that by going to mattwaldmanrsp.com and finding, all the quality work that's there with film study, my YouTube channel, Matt Waldman's RSP Film Room. I have a podcast, Matt Waldman's RSP Film Room, that does scout talk with guys like Russ Landy, who is a former NFL scout and currently works as a head of personnel for the Edmonton Elks up in the CFL. And obviously a lot of other great folks that I get a chance to work with. There's too many to name, but thank you guys for getting a chance to do this. This was just a blast, and it's good reconnecting with you guys. And I'm I gotta say it's a major accomplishment for someone who talks as much as I do that you were able to keep this podcast under an hour.
And thank you guys for listening. Make sure you do check out the Dynasty landing page. Look for those top 25 rookie rankings. Look for the Dynasty download newsletter, and we'll talk to you next Tuesday.